didn't know what bullying was all about until I showed up in Scotland. Started off in England as a born in London because I guess the Catholic Protestant thing was big then as well. And that's when people had to run away from their families in Scotland because they were having kids to, mixed people. Mixed in the sense of Catholic and Protestant. So my mum and dad were in that boat, so they sailed their boat down to London. And then they had me. And then along the way there was another couple of sisters. And then when I was about 4 or 5, I remember things were starting to change. Looked like we're going somewhere other than where we were. So my grandmother showed up and took us to this big building. I guess it was a cathedral or a church. Never been in one before. Didn't know what cathedral or church was all about. Didn't know what all these statues were all about. Didn't know nothing because my mum and dad at that time never exposed us to religion. Didn't know what religion was. It was odd. So here we are getting water splashed on us, which I thought was odd, with a funny dressed guy in these purple robes. Didn't know what the hell he was all about. So got that done to us. So my grandmother brings us back to our house in Portobello Road in London and makes the announcement that we're Catholics now, that we've been baptised that day. And I guess looking back in hindsight, it was because we were moving back to Scotland. They were getting us ready for the big move back to Scotland, which we knew nothing about until the day it happened. Took us to this whole new place called Scotland, and the town called Greenock, right there in the River Clyde. And that was quite a rude awakening, because where we lived in London, I was right on a market. It was almost like living the EastEnders, if you watch that show. Right on the market, great life, great people, characters all over the place, loved it. I was loved, I felt loved, I felt in a place I was safe. Felt that everywhere I went, and I went all over London. Even as a 4 or 5 year old, I would hop on a bus and away I'd go see London. And I'd always end up in a cop shop and cops taking me back to my mum and dad, and it got to the point where my mum and dad actually had to stitch my names and my address and my clothes because I was away so much. And I guess that was me getting my wanderlust at that time. So go from a utopian little life as a 5-year-old in London and then getting taken to what turned out to be pretty hellish, because one thing about Scotland is they definitely know how to hate people, and I was hated as soon as I showed up on the doorstep. I guess because I was English. I didn't know there was so much hatred against English until I felt it. And religion, again, back to that. All of a sudden I went from a school in London which knew nothing, never talked about religion, didn't talk about anything to do with God or Jesus or any of that. So I had no idea who they were. And there I am in my first playtime in this Catholic school in Greenock. And there was a Protestant school up the hill. There was another school up the hill that I could see. Didn't know it was Protestant or Catholic or what the difference was. But anyway, they start at the first playtime throwing stones at one another and running up the hill and running down the hill, and there was daft wee songs getting sang. There was a prodded up, quack, quack, quack. I don't even remember the rest of it, but they were like goading one another and screaming at one another and insulting one another and throwing stones at one another. I'd never seen this before. This was a shock to my system. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing and started to ask people what was going on. What was this all about and who are they? And they're saying, oh, they're the proddies, we hate the proddies. We do? Why do we hate the proddies? Oh, they killed Jesus. Oh my God, they did. So I start picking up stones because that's what they were all doing, and I start running up the hill and I start throwing stones and I start shouting at the people around me going, who was Jesus? Who was Jesus? Was Jesus your little friend? In this English accent, of course, they all look around and they see me and start to ask who the hell I was. And start throwing stones at me, start cursing at me, start shouting and bawling at me. And anyway, I became a target after that, and I was big bullseye on my back, so I did pretty well every day, getting chased by someone. And then we moved from the west end of Greenock to the east end of Greenock, and that was quite a big move as well, because it took me to a worse place than what I thought I was in. Took me to the east end of Greenock and put me right in the heart of Cardross Road, Leven Road, the Strohan, the QB, Quarrier Street, all vicious gangs. All these gangs that I was never exposed to either, started to find myself in amongst. And the school they put me in as well was funny enough, it was called St Kenneth's. But anyway, it wasn't heaven for me, because right from the get-go, the accent and being English and different, hated, right for day one, hated by an element, not everyone. But there's an element over there that just hate for the sake of hating. And anyway, those guys and a group of them would chase me from school every day, hunt me down like an animal every day. And some days they'd get me where I'd roll up and they'd put the boots to me. I'd never had that done to me before. Never been beat up like that before, you know, and I got it every day. Got it every day for years. I guess it was until all the brothers of one particular family had left this school. And there was only left with one of them, one of the guys. And anyway, the bullying aspect was about 6 years worth. I must have took that for, because I only stopped when I stood up to this one guy that was left, and he came up to me in the school playground and the usual entourage around him. And if you've ever grown up in school, everyone has. It's different elements or different levels of violence you're subjected to. I think the ones in Scotland are probably some of the worst, because it was rampant in those days anyway. I don't know how it is now, but it was awful. So the only thing I could do that day was, because it's just the one guy, was to stand up to him. And standing up to him was the biggest change I'd ever made in my life up to that point. I was 11 and a half. Stood up to him and I'll just say that I overcame that situation, and got dragged into the headmaster's office and got 12 of the best, but it was 12 of the best I'd ever gotten. The shipyards were the most radical people you'll ever work with and for. They were rebellious, the shipyards. And the shipyards I worked in was Scott Lithgow, the Scott Lithgow Shipbuilding Group. And it was on the River Clyde in Greenock. It was Greenock, Port Glasgow, Bowling, which was Dunfermline. And there was about I think it was 9 shipyards in the group. And it was a very flourishing shipyard. It had been there since 1711. 1711 till 1981, I think was the time frame, but 1711 it had been there since, Scott Lithgow. And what ended up happening was there was 15,000 men at its peak, but it kind of optimised about 8,000. I can remember going to meetings where there was 8,000 guys at the meeting, 9,000 guys. And I remember one of the first meetings I went to was an issue. It was about the diluting of the workforce. They were called dilutees. And what they basically were was government training centres were all over the place. Government trained tradesmen. They were government trained platers, government trained welders, and they were going to come in and eventually be journeymen after a year's tenure. So they became dilutees, and that was the first big fight, was about the dilutees, and we didn't want the dilutees, but they got the dilutees, they got them anyway, and they became Boilermakers. The other big fight that was going on at that time was multi-flexibility, multi-flexible worker, which meant that the guy that was pushing the button on the guillotine could push the buttons on the rollers as well, and vice versa. Or the guy that was doing the burning could do the fitting as well. There were a big fight against it. They were calling it Americanisation. Americanisation of the shipyards is what the workers were calling it, because it was an Americanism where we would do our own fitting, our own welding, our own scaffolding, our own everything. We called it Americana. So that was a big fight, but eventually again they end up getting it. They end up getting what they wanted, and we became a multiple flexible workforce. So the shipyards, they weren't the most profitable things. Scott Lithgow at one time had about 8 building berths with boats and submarines on every berth. We were building anything from ferries to submarines to spy boats to drill ships. Brilliant stuff, doing great stuff, so they were leaps and bounds ahead of everybody. But then along the way, I guess Maggie Thatcher came to power, 1979, the housewife's choice. All the housewives voted for a woman, and thinking that would be the best thing that would, that would ever happen to the UK is if we get this Maggie Thatcher in. So Maggie Thatcher came in as the Prime Minister, and things changed drastically, because I guess Scotland became the bane of the English Parliament, in that we were a strong union. We were the fuck you attitude all over Scotland. There was the steel works, there was the power grid, there was the car companies, there was the shipyards, there was the mines. They were all the strong unions, all of them strong unions. And over the course of Maggie Thatcher's time and on into John Major, she made a few moves that were anti-union, and I guess she really wanted to do the unions in, because she was one of those people that believed the unions had too much power over there. So what they started to do was started to bring laws through the courts. They started to put people through the courts, and I remember a couple of guys came through the courts, and this is going on right now, and it's about the monies that the union paid to the Labour Party at that time. Like, there was 2 union guys stating that they didn't believe their monies, their dues, portions of that should go to the Labour Party. They would rather it went to some charity of their choice. And consequently, that was the Tories took thousands and upon thousands, maybe even millions of pounds away from the Labour Party by that one move. The next couple of things she did was that she put a couple of guys through against the closed shop. They didn't believe that it was, I guess it's similar to the affirmative action that's going through the States at that time as well, because there was Thatcher, Reagan and Mulroney, the three amigos we all call them. And what each of them were doing in their countries, they were all doing together. So Thatcher put this thing through the courts that the closed shop was a bad thing, and you should be able to do that job just by being skilled enough. So done away with the closed shops. So that was another nail in the coffin of the unions.
Today, you will find a Boilermaker in England, but you won't find a Boilermakers Union. There is no Boilermaker Union in England anymore. They are part of another union, and I don't think that's something that we want to ever be. We've got that commitment from this leadership that is not on their agenda, and I would like to see the support of the committee fulfilled.
The Boilermakers, a lot of people turned their backs on the Boilermakers. I've heard speeches by people at convention that talk about don't do what the UK Boilermaker did. Well, all the UK Boilermaker did was turn their back on their union because they felt their union had turned their back on them, and stopped paying their union dues, and stopped going to meetings, and just stopped, because the moves that Thatcher made had the desired impact, and that we did not need to be a union member to be employed. We did not need to be a Boilermaker to be employed in that place, so you could employ anyone. So by not being a union member had no impact on your job. So it was a double-edged sword. So the people who belonged to the unions at the time started to turn their back on the unions because of the disdain they had for the unions at the time. They keep selling us down the river every time we bring them in, and blah, blah, blah. So the Boilermakers' response at that time to that was to amalgamate in 1982 with the General Municipal Workers. The General Municipal Workers are the janitors, the little tea ladies, little canteen women at that time. So we amalgamated with janitorial services to make ourselves a bigger union. So we were called the General Municipal Boilermakers from 1982 on. And that gave them more membership, but it didn't really give them anything more as far as structure goes for the Boilermaker entity, because the Boilermaker was now starting to lose his identity. So along the way from there, the General Municipal Boilermakers have now amalgamated with another 5 unions. Amalgamating the union seems to be the answer to the response to the way things went in the UK. So there's now a 7 union amalgamation called GMB Union. They don't even have the Boilermaker part in there anymore. No shipbuilders and iron bridge builders and forgers and helpers, it's just GMB. And the Boilermakers within the GMB, who I still am friends with and still have contact with, are telling me that they've lost their Boilermaker identity completely. They are GMB union members, and that's all. They're not a division, they're nothing, they're just GMB members, but they keep their own identity by doing things under the Boilermaker flag, by doing a lot of charity stuff for the Boilermaker flag. They've got a couple of hospitals, and especially in Scotland, they've got a couple of hospitals, one being the sick children's up there in York Hill, that they make sure that they get monies to, and it goes to them under the name of the Boilermakers. So they're still trying to hold on to their identity, they're still trying to keep it going. put me in some of their hotspots, and one of the biggest hotspots was the day the Piper Alpha blew. That was one of the most traumatic days, and I don't think there'll ever be a day worse than that day in the oil industry for the UK. That one lives on, and that's going to never be forgotten, is what happened that day. And the essence of that was there was a lot of complaints made about that rig. There was a lot of complaints made by the workers during the time of that rig's life, over its 25, 26 years. It pumped out the most crude in the North Sea for the size of it, constantly 60,000 barrels a day, constantly pumping out the maximum. And the day that thing blew up was, we were on another gas rig, and we were going through some strife up until that time. And the day that blew, it blew everybody out the water on the job I was on, emotionally anyway. It was awful seeing men cry, and there was a lot of men crying that day. It's awful to see men dying that way, and that was an awful way for people to die. And there's been a lot of lessons learnt, hopefully, out of that. And I guess I would recommend that you look at the movie Spiral to Disaster if you want to see the story of that and what happened to that rig that day. But the story we had that day was, again, like I said, I just arrived on a gas rig called the West Sol Alpha, and it was infamous. I was just on it my first trip. That was my first trip, and I just came from a rig. I'd been on 18 months, and I was the rep on that rig for that 18-month period, and things were ticking along nice. But again, because I'd taken a break and come over to Canada and check out Canada at that time, when I came back from taking a trip off, I'd been transferred, and that's what they can do, they just transfer you. So I was transferred from this rig that I'd been rep on for 18 months and transferred to the biggest bag of nails that was known in the North Sea at that time, offshore of Hull, the West Sol Alpha. It was renowned for being run by a bunch of arseholes. Well, one arsehole in particular, because they weren't all arseholes, as I found out when I got there myself. The story was they were all arseholes, it was an arsehole job, and blah blah blah. But anyway, when I got transferred and landed on it, the first two people that were waiting to meet me, I didn't even have my survival suit off from the flight. There was two Boilermaker reps, a plater and a welder, Charlie and Kevin. Charlie being a very good friend of mine from when I was rep on the other rig. He'd came through that rig. And the two of them were asking for help, and I hadn't even got my survival suit off. And they were saying, this job's bad, this job's terrible, it's the most unsafe thing they've ever been on, it's been run by a tyrant, and they needed help. Would I help them? And I recognised right away by the fact that I hadn't even got my suit off, I was only on the rig a minute, it must be serious. They must be right, they have to be right. Why wouldn't I believe them? They're good guys. And so I believed them. I said, sure, I would help any way I can. So as it turns out, the first day on an oil rig is usually just get your bed, get your locker, get your room, get yourself sorted out. And if you're lucky enough to be there early enough to get your coveralls on, you might go out and actually see the job. But most first days on the rig you don't, especially first day, because there's a lot of things to do, a lot of orientation to do. So I never got to the actual rig, so no one knew I was even there except for Charlie and Kevin. So that night, go to bed. This is the week before the Piper, by the way, just to give you a time frame. This is exactly a week before the Piper. So I go to bed that night, and about 11:30 I'm getting shook up. Charlie, he says, we've got a major problem on the night shift, and we're going to call a meeting in the cinema. There's a 500-man cinema. We're on this barge, flotel, called the Sir Lancelot, and 25-year-old thing that was, anyway, it was a mess. So I got up at my bed, come down to the cinema, and everybody's there. There's 3 oil rigs, or 3 gas rigs being serviced by this flotel, and they're all there from all these 3 rigs. And the night shift, Kevin and Charlie are there. They're the 2 reps. So they're leading the chorus, and I'm in the audience. And what was happening was there was 12 Boilermakers, players, welders, this West Sole Alpha had been tore down to bare bones. Everything had been taken because they were refurbishing it back up to a reusable, reworkable gas rig to give it more lifespan. So all the safeties were knocked away, or it was tore down to bare steel in a lot of places, and these guys were up underneath the heli deck. They were rebuilding and repainting the heli deck. And they were lucky enough or unlucky enough to be the guys doing the steel below the heli deck, re-stiffening, putting better stiffening on it and stuff. And they were doing shot blasting at the same time as these guys were working in this environment. So, shot blast, guys right in close proximity doesn't work. It's dangerous. So the guys complained that they couldn't work there, and could we please get alternative work? That's key these days as well, alternative work. Of course, by this time I'm the rep, so they're coming up to me and they're saying to me, what are we going to do about this, Kenny? I said, what can we do about it? It's happened, it's done. This guy's perished. We can't do it, but we have to do something about the North Sea from this day forth. Surely we can do something from this day forth. And I said, well, what do you propose we do? He says, I propose we start a strike, a North Sea strike. I says, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. You want to do something like that? That's crazy. That's crazy talk. He goes, well, why is that crazy talk? We have to do something. I said, you can't do that. I said, you know what this media is all about. You know what the right-wing media would do with struck on the backs of that. 100 odd guys dying, and we're going to strike on it. I said, they'll kill us. We'll get nothing. We'll be labelled pariahs, for God's sake. No, I'm not going for that. No. It's the wrong time, bad timing. No. No chance. So we all walk along, and the crowd's getting bigger and bigger, and another guy goes, well, why don't we sit in? Why don't we have a sit-in? I said, a sit-in? I said, you can shove it up your arse and all, a sit-in. What do you mean a sit-in? Look at it. I said, look at this rig we're on. There's no safeties on it. I said, the safety man has to come and shout at you and tell you to stop welding and grinding when they're venting off from the beach to here, and you see the plume of fumes coming out the end of the pipe. I said, there's no safeties on this thing. There's no lifeboats on this thing. The lifeboats are on the barge. I said, the barge, 25-year-old, used to be a Gulf of Mexico oil rig. I said, it's riddled with rust. It's a dump. I said, plus I just want to get back to my family. I don't want to do for sitting. Shove your sitting up your arse. Well, what would you do? What would I do? I would just leave. So I would do, I would just say, see ya, I'm done, I'm going home. Because this tub's a mess, that tub's a mess, this job's shite. I said, but meanwhile, I just want to get home with my family and sort it out there. I said, because right now that's how I feel, is I need to get home. And anyway, guys started to say they wanted to have a meeting. I says, a meeting? So you called a meeting? Yeah, we're calling a meeting. So I had to go up to the superintendent, which was now the new guy. Like I says, they weren't both arseholes. This guy was a decent guy, and I felt bad for this guy, Big Ron. But anyway, that's the news I had to give him, was that we wanted to have, a meeting in the cinema, and I'll tell you the outcome. They says, well, you need to get permission. I says, I'm not asking for permission, I'm just telling you there's everybody on this field want to have a meeting about what happened at the Piper this morning, last night. So that's it. So we get to the cinema, we're all in the cinema, and there's 500 guys, 495 guys, including me in the cinema, and I'm up there up front, just me, because now Kevin and Charlie they've went home. It's just me that's left. And I asked the guys, what do you want to do? You've called a meeting, what do you call a meeting for? And they says, well, we've got to do something about what just happened at the Piper. We've got to do something about that. The whole North Sea, it must be ready to do something about that. And I says, well, what do you want to do? What do you propose? And the guy put his hand up and said, we should strike. I propose we should strike. And I says, I'm not going to carry that one. I'm not going to go for that one. I says, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. And I explained again why, you've got to remember that there's a media out there that's right-wing, that hate the unions, that hate, the collective, that hate the trades, hate the workers. And any opportunity we give them to show their hatred and show, how bad we are, this is it. I said, they'll show us to be pariahs because we're striking for better conditions and better money and better this and better that, because on the backs of these guys that just died. I said, that's awful. That'd be an awful thing to do. I'm not into that. So that proposal went nowhere. So another guy goes up with his, I asked him what his idea is. He said, we should sit in. And I give him the same argument against the sit-in that I gave the guys on the deck. That's how old the barge was we were on, how decrepit and no safety there was left on the gas rig we were working on, and how dangerous the environment was. So why would I sit in on a dangerous environment? I said, no, I'm not going for that either. So I paced him back and forth, and finally a guy put his hand up. I said, what's your idea? He said, we should all resign. I said, that's a good one. I said, don't think anybody's ever done that before. We should all resign. And so I said, you're making that a motion? You're making that a proposal? He said, yes, I propose that we resign to a man. So again, I asked, is there any amendments to that? Guy put his hand up and said, yeah, I say we should have a sit-in. I said, so you're amending it to a sit-in? Yes, I'll make an amendment to the sit-in. I says, okay, we've got a proposal, we've got an amendment. I said, so we'll vote for the amendment first. Those in favour of the amendment. 2 guys put their hands up. The one guy that proposed it and the seconder were the only 2 guys that put their hands up. I thought, that's odd. And I says, who all votes for the proposal? They all jumped up, double-fisted like that. Get the choppers! And shouting at me, you know, that they want to resign, they want to quit, they want to leave, let's get it done. And so that's what the outcome was I had to, you know, write up a we the undersigned, I wrote a letter, we the undersigned have resigned from this project due to circumstances beyond our control, blah de blah blah. And my name and address, signed it, my phone number, and I gave it to the first guy in the front row. I says, start that here and put it through everybody. Because if you're going to stick my neck out, you're going to stick my neck out on something that we've written and signed onto. Because I'm the guy that's got to go tell people about this now. So off I go from the cinema back up to the superintendent's office, and I gave him my bad news. I said, you need to get some helicopters. He goes, why? I said, because 495 guys had just resigned. What the fuck? So you're on. I says, but that's the way they feel. I said, so I'm going to have to act on it. So anyway, that was the beginning of it. They ended up a few hours later, because it ended up almost like you know, as much as people were sad and down and out and despair about what had happened in the Piper, it was tinged with some happiness about what the guys had been proposing to do on this job. And it's never, I don't think I'd ever saw this kind of unity in my life before, other than what I used to see in the shipyards all the time. Shipyards had a lot of unity, a lot of unified idea amongst the collective, but this was the first collective I'd ever been in that had this much unity since then. And it was the bad times and getting the good silver lining on the cloud was these guys feeling that they were making a difference. They were doing something, standing up. This is the standing up. It wasn't just a whine without a stand up, it was a stand up. So then I became a Boilermaker here. And the first big difference I noticed between the UK and Canada, North America, is there's a structure. There's a unionised structure that is gone in the UK. The structure that still exists here is you get your job from the union hall, whereas in the UK you get your job yourself. It's 100% solicitation UK, and it's no solicitation here. So my first 3 years in the Boilermakers here was hard for my first wife at the time to take, because I wouldn't call up any jobs. I did 15 months at Darlington, then I was unemployed for about 3 months and wouldn't call up any jobs. She found it odd that I wasn't phoning any jobs, I wasn't searching for any jobs. I says, I can't, I'm not allowed. So that went on for about the first 3 years, where I had unemployment each of those 3 years, and it was tough. It was really tough in the early 90s for a lot of guys, and it was a struggle. And so eventually I had to learn to fill those gaps in, and because I couldn't survive, I couldn't afford to be that unemployed for those lengths of time. So I had to do my own thing, and I ended up becoming a self-employed welder and going back into the process systems racket that had brought me over, and started to do very well in that environment again. So I was able to work both, because can't survive, and there's a lot of guys here that can't survive their unemployment, and it's tough to do the unemployment, but it's a case of having shorter times of unemployment between jobs, and you're much more able to stick doing the boilermaking, which I've learnt as well, because I ended up getting back into the process racket, because I became a bit of a thorn in the Boilermaker side when I started to get my voice within the Boilermaker environment here. And it's, again, this difference is over the old country, my voice was being relayed to the managers and the contractor on the job, because I never had a union structure to take my voice to there. Whereas here, my voice has to go through the union structure, and it's the union structure that'll pitch for you. They'll put your best case, your best argument forward for you. And I've kind of lost the ability to do my own pitching over here, to do my own dealing, my own negotiating, because I'm much more comfortable pitching something for myself by me. But I had to learn to let that go. I had to learn to let others do the talking for you and have faith in them that the talk that they did talk for you was a good talk and was the right talk. And there's a lot of the guys that take on that role that do a good job, but there's a few guys that take that role on that don't do a job at all and don't really do much pitching for you. So I kind of fell foul of those guys in the early 90s, and it became a bit of a battleground. And I started to see rollbacks, I started to see, contracts were coming through, we were getting less instead of getting a little bit more. And there was accords made, there was chestnut part accord made where we get way less than my regular contract. There was, when I was growing up as a boy, they were talking about how little you were going to work and how less you were going to work the older you got. And it seems to be I'm working more for less. And I'm seeing a lot of, I was seeing a lot of negative stuff that I didn't like from the group I was part of now. And so I started to voice my voice to them. And they were starting to get my disdain then as well in the early 90s. I wasn't pleased with what I was seeing. I wasn't happy with what was going on. And it really affected me. It had a huge impact on me to the point where I pretty well ended up in a depression. Deep, dark depression, because I couldn't understand the environment I was working in, that they kept telling you, they kept thanking you for the welding you were doing, they kept telling you how good a welder you were, they kept telling you how good a worker you were, but meanwhile you were first one gone. First one laid off, first one let go. And that started to have a real effect on me, because I see a lot of guys in jobs for 20 years, 25 years at that time, and wondering, the only reason why they were getting kept in those jobs was because they didn't use this, they wouldn't speak up. And of course I would step into jobs and I would do all the talking, I would speak up for everybody. And that's what I started to realise was it was my attitude that people didn't like, and that's why they were getting rid of me so soon. That was why the managers and the stewards and whoever else would rather see me gone, because there was less work for them. If I'd just left the job without saying my piece, then I was even more disappointed and more dejected with myself, because it's like where I come from back in the old country, it's you may as well get hung for a sheep as get hung for a lamb. So if you're getting hung at all, then make the hanging worthwhile. So I had a reputation for speaking my mind and really speaking it vehemently, and putting some guys really off me a lot. And between the union reps at the time and the managers at the time, I had a hell of a time. I just couldn't find my comfort zone. I just couldn't find it. I just couldn't settle, because there was always something that I was seeing. There was always something that somebody would tell me that would annoy me so much that I would have to act on it. And by acting on these things, it was always acted against me. So in light of that, I ended up walking out, leaving the union, as far as being a worker, but I still kept my connection to the union as far as being an organiser. I'd always had this ideal that the process systems industry should have Boilermakers in it, and it did have Boilermakers in it. And so having an understanding of this process systems racket, I ended up going back to it. So I figured out that I was going to organise a process systems racket, and that's one of the reasons why I went there as a full-time welder with this one particular company. It was one of the best companies in the environment. So over the course of 6 years with the company and 6 years away from the Boilermakers, I ended up becoming project manager. so much the title, but that was the job. The title they gave me was team leader. But I ended up in charge of the service department and the field department, the field installation department. And they put me in charge of all the subcontractors and all the full-time guys in those two structures. And it was a first for me to be in charge of things. And one of the things that I ended up doing during my depression years was I ended up being so depressed, I ended up in therapy. And so the therapist at the time explained it to me that the 95% of my depression was work-related, and the environment I was working in, I was feeling like I was speaking my mind, and getting laid off was because I was this guy and they were that guy. So he told me in those days, you have to come and get to be this guy or get to be that guy, and then you control the environment. You control your own utopia as a manager. And not realising when he gave me that advice, I would end up being that guy one day. And he was 100% right on one aspect. Is yes, you do get to control the environment for your workers, you do get to control the safety, you do get to control the equipment, you do get to control all of that, but you don't get to control the pace of work, the amount of work, the work coming in to, you know, to the point where it's you have to go hustle to find the work. And that takes up a lot of time, is finding the work. But once you find it and then getting the right crew on it, it ends up working out. But I learnt a whole different set of ideals, a whole different set of ideas, because I ended up becoming the manager as well as having been the worker rep. So being the manager with a worker rep head on, I believe, is a good mix, because I looked at a lot of things that I don't think a regular manager who hadn't come through that environment wouldn't have looked at. I started to initiate permitry. I started to initiate safety meetings. I started to initiate the equipment being more safer. I started to initiate better quality equipment so that workers could be more efficient. And I started to, really work a lot of the problem solving skills that I believe I've got as well, because the director that I worked for at the time, an Englishman, used to tell me that don't bring me your problems, bring me your problems and your solutions. So if you're the guy in the field and you see the problem in the field, then you know more about it than I do. So rather than just moaning about the problem, whining about the problem, bring us the problem and let's fix the problem and solve it. So that's what I started to do, and it was because of those problem solving skills that I was using that is why I ended up getting the job I got. It's because I was just looking for problems to solve, not avoiding problems. A lot of people seem to avoid problems, shy away from problems, but problems are opportunities to help. Whether it's a mechanical problem, or whether it's an emotional problem in the work group, or whether it's a mix problem in the work group, it has to be solved. You need to solve it. So I got a lot of solving skills added to the skills I already had. And of course I ended up leaving that company and going working for myself with another guy, and we started a little partnership, and it thrived as well. It thrived because, again, we were good to the guys that were working with us. We were good to the guys we were working for. We weren't ripping anybody off. It's a moral, ethical group that we were part of, and it was the real time work we were doing. It was real things we were doing. There was nothing. If we encountered a problem, we solved it, but we also recognised it, and we also showed it off to the group we were working for, that this brick wall wasn't here in the beginning, but there's a brick wall here now. We either got to go under it, over it, or through it, but we're letting you know that we've encountered this brick wall, because there's a cost to that. And for every problem that you encounter, there's a cost to fix it, there's a cost to solve it. So during that six-year time away, I tried to organise that industry by getting the shop rep that we had at the time to come into the shop that I was in and try and organise the shop. But the shop were already being treated very well, already being paid very well, and they weren't being exploited, so there was no need of a secondary union. I also had a bunch of guys working for me that were subbing, and I wanted to pay them the Boilermaker rate, so I was able to pay them the Boilermaker rate, and then I sent them down to the hall and asked them to become signatory to the Boilermakers with the rate they're being paid. But they were encountered with you can't be half pregnant, you can't be half this or half that, so it wasn't bought into. They couldn't do it. So then I get the markup from the union rep at the hall for the Pickering restart, and it was a 3 million man-hour markup. I got that, I took that to the company, and I gave it to the engineering department, and I asked them to somehow get us some work out of this, and I would get us some Boilermakers and go do the work. But again, there was another roadblock. We were already on site through another subsidiary, and it would have been conflict of interest. So over the course of that 6 years, I tried those 3 different ways of trying to get it back to the Boilermakers or into the Boilermaker field, and I couldn't. So ended up giving up on all of that and giving up on my own business and going back to the Boilermakers because I was missing it. You know, as much as I felt the disdain that I felt when I left, and I still tried to be connected to it, I still kept coming to the hall, I still kept coming to meetings, I still kept doing as much as I could. And but then there was the Boilermaker hierarchy at that time felt the need to suspend me. Instead of phoning me or letting me know or sending me a letter, there was a suspension put upon me. And I guess that was the punishment I was getting from them at that time about the things I was perceived to be doing or not doing. But as soon as I heard I was suspended, I went down the next morning and paid myself up full and got myself reinstated and came back in again. And came back to be a Boilermaker eventually as well, and decided that the only way that you can change things is to become part of the executive, is to become part of the hierarchical order. So I'd made a decision to come back to the Boilermakers, to be the best Boilermaker I could be still, and also to be part of the union executive, because at that time, that was about 10 years ago, maybe more, 12 years ago when I came back, but 10 years ago when I met a good friend, Jimmy Watson, and he and I ended up sharing a house together. And Jimmy had aspirations for getting on the executive, and through meeting with him and through talking with him and staying with him and sharing houses with him, a couple of houses we ended up living on together, and a couple of jobs we ended up working on together, started to germinate, started to formulate this idea that we could, you know, maybe get ourselves onto the executive, maybe, you know, help the union members, you know, try and be the more pragmatic executive members than we had seen before, or we had lived through before, and also look at, you know, getting some committees going and getting some real work done and getting some real things changed. And so I did. I let it be known that I was now going to be pursuing this, and I started to go to my meetings more regularly.
See, I'm not too sure if I really met Kenny, or Kenny sort of tracked me down at Pickering. Actually, he said that he heard a lot of things about me. He wanted to meet me in person, and that's where the friendship started. We started off talking about politics and what we do to make some positive change. And I decided to run, and Kenny decided to run, and the rest is history. Kenny's now the chairman of the trustees, and I'm the business manager for the local. Kenny was the one that talked to me how things are done out in Scotland in regards to a welding apprenticeship, and that really got my wheels turning. And when I took a look at our out of work list, we're consistently short of welders. And you know, through the office of Scott McMahon, our apprenticeship coordinator, we've tried really hard to get members to take up the welding craft, but consistently it's not happening. So we've decided that the local has gotten big enough that we're going to start our welding apprenticeship, and the welding apprenticeship will be called Pressure Systems Welder. And over the next 3 or 4 years, we'll be taking in 25 to 50 apprentices every year, and it's pretty exciting. And Kenny's been helping out with all the modules and doing the time study on the modules to see how long it takes to actually do the module, go through the process. And I'll be working with the rest of the instructors down south to figure out exactly what this program will look like from the time the apprentice comes into the shop and does his school, what it looks like in the shop, and the rest of the components with the apprenticeship.
I'm really enjoying all aspects of boilermaking these days, especially the welding. I believe the welding needs to be helped a lot. I believe we need more guys to be interested in the welding, and we've really got to chase more welding jobs, and we've really got to be more focused on training our welders.
The future is there for us. It depends on what we're going to do with it, which makes it a bright future or a bleak future. We need to take the time to start to look after one another, to look after our jobs, to be on time, to be honest and show integrity with everything that we do. And going forward, I'd like to see Boilermakers look at other Boilermakers like family. I like to see the power of one union united.
Bad that the girls that are going in there to work in the camp, like we get 3 hours for going in, so it don't cost our guys anything. They're charging those fucking girls, they're paying $12 an hour non-union, and charge them $28 for the ride in on the bus. Now, can you fucking believe that?
Yeah.
And
Wow,
they're actually doing that.
Yeah.
So that's what you're dealing with as far as the camp goes, yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna process that through Mitch and then away we
Right on.
go.
Excellent.
You got some info from me on that red seal?
Sure.
Lovely. Just do some business.
Okay.
If we can help each other, pick each other up in the worst of times, look after each other when we're in the best of times, and celebrate with one another our victories and learn from our losses, our future will be bright. I can promise you this.
I'm going to give you some red seal stuff. For getting that red seal off on the internet.
Yes. You want to do it right now?
Yeah,
All right.
perfect.
So you want to do the test right now?
No, I'm going to go for the assignment with you first.
Okay.
I might do it between the meetings. I might end up doing it.
Do you have the
between-
registration number with you?
I need to see Sandra.
Because I can set you up.
Yeah.
So you need your registration number to get you on,
Registration number, okay.
and I'll key all this up. You need me, Ellie? Yeah, come on in.
This what you're gonna be handing out,
What's that?
the meeting?
What, I mean, what are you talking about, the pension
letter
thing?
and the other thing,
Just miss you.
Oh,
Thanks, Ellie.
in case you wanted to.
yeah,
Okay.
Ali.
Yeah.
Jimmy
Yeah,
sent
this
me.
is going out.
Jimmy sent me the C377 bill, 377 stuff, but I've got it on my phone. I forgot to print it off. Can you print that off for
Yeah,
me?
sure.
I think there was 8 attachments or something.
Yeah, no
that were
problem.
sent.
Okay. Yeah, Ellie, this is all going in the package. I gotta write a pension component for my
Okay,
business
fine.
manager report. Yeah, I'll get, that'll take me 5 minutes.
Okay.
I really enjoy going to the meetings. I really enjoy seeing the guys. I love being part of this brotherhood. I love being, you know, in a position that I can help, in a position that I can put your message forward, in a position that I can do, you know, anything that you want me to do.